Welcome to the church. Welcome to our meeting this morning, the first meeting of April. Silly temptations to do an April Fool's joke. I'll do none of those at all. We did see a lot of shenanigans, if you will, on TV and on different ways. And none of these will be mentioned this morning at all. Instead, I want you to know that our message today is about perspective. Okay, I'll give you the theme in a little bit, but it's all about perspective. And it's all about perspective on a daily basis. Actually, you could break it down even further than that. It's a perspective on a moment to moment to moment basis. So my perspective this morning is to look at everyone online, to look at the couple that are here, and say that from my perspective, I'm very thankful. And I mean that so sincerely. My perspective could be we're just a few here locally, and find myself in why is so-and-so not here or someone else not here. Instead, I'm choosing to look at the fewer here and think how good God is to inspire you all to come. I look on the screen and see so many on screen and think how good God is to inspire you all with a good desire to affect your lives. In some way affect your spiritual lives, that the spiritual side of you is greater than the natural side of you. That's really what this is about. That's really what, I don't want to get too deep here or too shallow in my attempt to look deep, but that's really what life is about. Life is a quest of balancing and finding the spirituality as the overriding push, motivation, initiative within. And it's hard. I mean, it's really, really hard to do that. So I applaud you. I want to take time to tell you God love you for being here, in every way possible, whether it's online or live and in person. Having said all of that, our theme is a blessing or a curse. A blessing or a curse. You've heard me say this phrase over and over and over again, and I'm going to say it again this morning because I'm not sure that everyone understands. They just hear it, I call it verbal furniture. Sometimes when you hear something over and over, you're almost deaf to it. It's a phrase that you've heard before and you're deafened to it. And what furniture means is if you go into your house and the lights are out, you have no power in the house, you can maneuver and navigate around your furniture because you know where the sofa is. You know where that sitting chair is. You know that you left 2 books on the floor in the middle of the living room. You just get around them without even able to see them. That's sometimes how phrases and words become to us. We just maneuver around them and it's just noise, kind of like Charlie Brown's parents. You just hear a phrase and there's no reception to it. The phrase is the devil's endorsement. And I know you've heard that, but there's a responsibility that goes with this phrase. And the responsibility is to understand it and then to react to it. So what the devil's endorsement is, very simply, and for those of you who know it, just bear with me. The devil's endorsement is this. When you turn in a moment, in a life, in any moment, or even lifelong decision to follow Jesus Christ, to turn yourself to him, that means you are completely turning your back on the evil one. And if the natural man truly is an enemy to God, and if the natural man is how we spend a lot of our lives, then we've actually spent a lot of our time facing that evil one. So that when we turn away from him, he becomes jealous and he stirs up. It can be as small as, and some of you may have experienced this morning, it can be as small as making it hard to get to church on Sunday. It can be as hard as some debilitating circumstance or situation in your life, whether by health, whether by job, whether by, it's just so many ways that we can be affected in a negative way. So now that you understand the devil's endorsement, or re-understand for those of you who already knew, the real decision to be made with the devil's endorsement is, do I use it just to get me through this moment? Oh, I see what he's doing and I just get through it. Or do we embrace it and celebrate it? A blessing or a curse? Do I receive that stumbling on Sunday morning, little thing where I finally get my whole outfit together, and as I'm leaving, something on my outfit catches and rips, or whatever it is, something small like that. Oh, I gotta change my clothes and get all mad. And the natural reaction is to be angered by it. When something major comes into our lives, there's discouragement, there's disappointment, there's full letdown. And I'm saying your other choice is to embrace it. See the attempt to discourage you, embrace it, and then celebrate it. Because what he's doing is he's acknowledging your great decision to choose to do something spiritual, when it would be much easier to choose to do something natural. Natural is just what it is. By nature, I get angry. It's my natural reaction. Can I combat that? Only if I embrace and celebrate. Curse or a blessing. Ephesians says it this way: we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness. It's not the situation. It's he who causes the situation. It's not that person snapping at you. It's he who causes that in your life. Those closest to us seem to have just the right thing to say to really irritate us. It's not them that we wrestle with. It's the motivator behind that contention. So we don't wrestle with one another. We wrestle with powers that cause such situations. So my question to you is, even when that happens, is it a blessing or is it a curse? I was thinking about the condition of us, all of us. And by us, I mean all of mankind. Let's not make it very, very personal here. But I think of this time period. I don't recall a time that's been more. Maybe it's been the same, maybe it's always been, but I don't remember a time when it's been so out there that we're different. And so difference has been a theme for a couple of years at least. And that difference is pointed out in many ways. It's pointed out by way of ethnicity, by way of beliefs. We've seen attacks on different belief systems, them versus us versus them. We've highlighted the differences in our upbringings, maybe the areas we're from, even to schools. One of the most loving people in our meetings is Sister Patty, but we heard a big difference when she mentioned Michigan State and Michigan. Big difference. Those differences cause contentions. Maybe it came to my mind again last night as I watched this Duke, North Carolina game. Contentions. Gender, age, hair color, education. So many ways to define our differences. Regions, coming from Florida, moving to the Midwest. Jimmy and I talk about this all the time. Coming from Atlanta, moving to Kentucky. It's a big difference. And the difference is not embraced as good. Normally, the difference is embraced as bad. And we find difference a bad thing, not a good thing. Lonnie and I were talking probably 2 weeks ago. And he painted this picture for me that I've thought about, but his articulation brought it to me and brought it home. I've coached, as has he, I've coached many sports. My personal favorite has always been football. Lonnie is a football coach who it's been thrust upon him to coach baseball at times, or basketball or something else, but he's a football coach. And in our conversation, he spoke to the beauty of football. He said, what I love about football is I can go into my halls at the high school and I can recruit almost anybody. Doesn't matter if they're big or they're small, fast or slow, skilled to throw the ball, skilled to catch the ball or not. It doesn't matter. In football, there is a position for everybody. And then over and above that are the lessons that the game teaches. And so the desire to influence people through difference, not through same. No other sport is like football. There may be some that are similar, but no other sport is like football. But we can't send our son. He's the tiniest little thing. We need a tiny little scat back on the team. Send your son out. I don't want to send my son out. He's big and he's slow and I don't know if he can help the team. We're hurting for some linemen. Send that big boy out. I don't know if my daughter can play football. It's a boys' sport. What Lonnie and I learned at the last high school we were at, send your daughters out. All are invited. Difference is embraced. Difference is needed. Difference is required. Difference defines the team. Difference defines the family. So difference can be seen as, if you will, a blessing or a curse. With difference comes another word that kind of plays in, and that's opposites. Sometimes difference is just a shade. Sometimes difference is just an inch. Sometimes difference is just a pound, but sometimes difference is opposites. And there's a phrase out there that we all have probably used or at least heard, and that's opposites attract. I've said it. I often say Candace and I are opposites and we were attracted to each other. But what I've found is we have as many similarities as we do differences. So opposites is not quite a good definition, a clear definition, even a correct definition of Candace and I. But there are things that she brings to me that I don't have because we're opposite in those areas. And it's all value to me. I love the way she thinks. It's unlike my thinking. I love the way she feels. It's unlike my feelings. But we also are very in sync on other things. So I'm thinking of all of that. My mind was just spinning on all of that. Differences, opposites, how we perceive things. Either a blessing or a curse. Certainly those differences for she and I have, for Candace and I, have caused, Candace and me actually, have caused problems. But more often than anything, it's been a blessing to us. It's been an enhancement to our relationship. I am certainly the benefactor from Candace's differences. So I embrace different. Candace would say, I am different. And so maybe it's self-serving when I say I embrace different. Maybe it's not an open-mindedness, but a desire for others to be open-minded in these areas. And then I went to opposites attract, and I went to probably the deeper conversation that I had this week. I had a conversation with a young person who was heading to have a one-on-one conversation with someone to discuss situations in their life. We began to talk about fear and faith. And I don't know that anything has been spoken of more often over the last 2 years than fear and faith. Is the absence of one necessary in order for the other to flourish? Curse or a blessing? Since I've mentioned her, I'll mention her again. She who has enlightened me in so many areas. One of Candace's favorite verses is, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. Lord, I have faith, help me to overcome my fear, is what I hear when I hear that verse. If you remember the story, the man was bringing his son to be healed. If you believe, we can heal him. Lord, I believe. But what he was confessing is, deep down, I also have a fear. I have a fear because of my eyes have seen this condition in my son. My eyes have also seen you heal. So I know you can. Now the question is, will you? Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. And so we find that the absence may not be the requirement. In fact, it might even be just the opposite of that thought. Hope you understand what I mean by that. There's a church locally that used to have a big sign up out front, right when this sickness came in. No fear here. I thought immediately, I don't want to go in that church. First, they're missing one of the tenets of our faith, a fear of God. And if they're saying no fear here, they're missing one of the first foundation points. I know that's not what they meant when they put that sign up. But obviously, fear is a factor, is a necessary factor. You see, if I go into battle, if I'm called to stand for the nation and serve in the armed forces, and I go into battle with no fear, that's a dangerous situation. Walking into a battle with no fear does not mean I'm courageous. It may, in fact, mean I'm foolish. No fear here, and the people are shooting around, and I just stand up. I have no fear. I won't finish that story, but I won't be standing long. So fear, a lack of fear, may indicate foolishness. See, when I walk into that same battle with fears and concerns, and I continue to walk forward, that's courage. That's overcoming what comes natural to me. And then if I transition to faith, not just by duty, I'm not just walking into this battle by duty, I'm walking in with a faith in God. I've transcended all of that. Fear does not run from me, it stays deep in me. I'm just overcoming it to the honor and glory of God. So they coexist. Actually, even further, they may be interdependent. I may need that fear in order to find my faith. Brother Mark Kovacic said something. I don't know if I'll find it. I made a quick note in here, but he used such a beautiful statement. I'm probably not going to find it. I put some notes down. But he said sometimes our faith is born from our fears. This is a man who's suffering a debilitating disease in his life. And when that happens, you process through all kinds of emotions. I think he was telling us, if we know his story, as he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's, I think what he was telling us is one of the emotions he had to push through was fear. How is this going to change my life? How am I going to function? Am I still going to function? And you can run with it yourself. You don't need any further description at that point. And so when he said, sometimes it's our fears that bring our faith into our lives, maybe what he was saying is, this is my testimony. Does he still have that fear? Yes, I don't think he has it at the same level when it first hit him, but he probably, I can't speak for him, by the way, but I think he must still battle that. Interdependency. I don't go into something with no fear. I don't pull into heavy traffic with no fear. I have a belief I can navigate in there, but I'm not just going to pull in front of anybody. That works to my benefit. Interdependent. began to think about grief and gratitude. And that's what this individual and I were talking about this week. We were talking about things like grief and gratitude, faith and fear. And as this individual was getting closer to their meeting where they were going to discuss some of these things, we came to the conclusion in that moment that they coexist within someone. And they feed that individual. I tell you that story only to say, without initiating that conversation, the next hour, hour and a half, however long that conversation was for this individual, it was all spent on talking about faith and fear, gratitude and grief. Not that one has to be absent. But instead, that they can coexist and in fact enhance one another within us. We read some scripture a couple weeks ago that says that it needs be that there is an opposition to all things. It needs to be. Hear what I'm saying to you. It's necessary for there to be opposition. I often say it this way. If this room were painted completely white, every chair was white, the carpeting was white, this was white, everything in this room was white, we'd appreciate nothing. Because that's all we'd know. I have evidence of that, so I'm going to share that evidence with you. Is joy the absence of misery? I'm going to ask my own question, my leading question. Your Honor, he's leading the witness. Yes, I am leading the witness, so I can make this point. Is joy the absence of misery? And again, I say, I think it's opposite. I think one defines the other. One enhances the other. One proves the other. If it were all white, we would not appreciate blue or red if all we knew was white. If Adam had not transgressed, they would have remained in a state of innocence. If Adam had not fallen, if Adam and Eve would have obeyed the rules, I want you to understand something. It would still be Adam and Eve. There would be none of us. They would remain in a state of innocence, like these little ones on the ground here. Innocent. They know nothing. I mean, they know a lot. These are my grandchildren. I spend the rest of my life bragging on them. Now I'm going to tell you they don't know a lot. But these children don't have life experience in some of the depth of life that you endure. Some of the enjoyments that you have, they don't know anything about. Some of the contentions, they don't know anything about. Some of the strategies, holding anger in, I'm going to punish that other person by holding it. They know nothing like that. But much deeper than that. And that was the condition of Adam and Eve before the fall. There was an innocence there. They only knew a white room. Nothing else. If Adam had not transgressed, they would have remained in a state of innocence. Watch this now. Listen to this. Having no joy. Now we look at these beautiful little people and they're filled with joy. So how could this be? Because it was a controlled environment that we're speaking of in the garden. All it was a white room in my example to you. I want you to understand that. Having no joy, for they knew no misery. Now we could stop right there and just talk about that for a while. Having no joy, for they knew no misery. So misery was necessary to define joy. Even if they laughed and had fun, There wasn't a deep joy in there. It just was. But when you know misery, you know joy. When you've battled hate in your heart, you understand what real love is. When you've had contention in your life, you understand the pleasure of peace, the necessity of peace. I'm going to read on and read that together now so that it all flows. If Adam had not transgressed, they would have remained in a state of innocence, having no joy, for they knew no misery, doing no good, for they knew no sin. All things have been done in the wisdom of him who knows all things. I take that. My interpretation of that is they had to fall. Were they predestined? I don't even want to get into that conversation. It's way too heavy, way too deep. You don't even want to go there. But all things were created by him who knows all things, in the wisdom of him who knows all things. So if we start to question this whole concept, what we're being taught here is understand this was all with purpose by God. This wasn't random. They didn't stumble upon a tree and pick the fruit and find knowledge. It wasn't random. All things have been done by him who knows all things. Goes on to say, one of my favorite statements and verses of my life, Adam fell that men might be. Because he sinned, because he fell, mankind was birthed. Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. So with that statement, we can infer from everything else I just read. If men are that they might have joy, and they had no joy until they had misery, then men are that they might experience misery. Not sure I ever read that verse in that, but I have to conclude from what I just read that there was no joy until there was misery. And everything was done by him who knows everything. And men are that they might have joy. So men are that they must experience misery. And so grief and gratitude are interdependent. They coexist, but deeper than coexist. They need one another to define one another. Because of the pains of relationships that I've had in my life, I adore my wife. Because I know what a bad choice looks like. Life is defined by choices. Brother Dwayne, in his opening prayer, spoke of choices. I hope you heard him say that. Life is defined by our choices. And choices come because options are presented. I present to you on this platter of life joy and misery. Choose wisely. I present to you on this platter of life love and hate. Choose wisely. Anger and peace, and we can go on and on with the examples. You understand what I'm saying. And then you have to determine blessing or a curse. Which is it? Yes, this is a hard, difficult, challenging time for me. Blessing or a curse. The way I process through this will define this portion of my life. I can wallow justifiably in my pain. I can wallow in my misery justifiably. Or I can see the blessing. All this with purpose. That's right. I can't know joy unless I know misery. This pain I have to accept as short term so that I understand later what joy is. silly joke I learned as a little boy. Why do you hit yourself with on the thumb with a hammer? Because it feels so good when I stop. Silliest joke. I mean, just the dumbest joke. It's actually in a book of jokes by Silly Billy is where I first heard that little joke. But that's what this is saying. Not necessarily a hammer, not necessarily hit your thumb, but this pain that I'm in today has purpose so that I understand the joy of overcoming. I've always loved that spiritual hymn, "We Shall Overcome." I've always loved that. That moves me to a depth I can't define here. It just moves me. And if you haven't experienced certain aspects of life that need overcoming, you may not be moved by that song. But there are so many things that some, and maybe most, have to overcome. And the ability to sing that song in the heart, in the moment, in the difficult times, is what makes that song rich. The song does not say we have overcome. The song says we shall overcome. I look with faith to a time that I overcome this moment. I don't wait till I get over there to start singing the song. I sing today. In my misery, in my pain, in my problems, in my circumstance, in my situation, I sing, we shall overcome faithfully. Is it a blessing or is it a curse? And I don't know what it defines in that sentence for you. I don't know what your it is that you're living in today. But only you can determine if it is a blessing or a curse. And let me give you a hint. No matter which you choose, blessing or curse, you can justify. And it's right. You understand what I'm saying? Yes, you can see it as a curse. But if that's how you perceive it and you're stranded in that moment, it's going to be hard to push through. But if you claim it as a blessing today, you'll see yourself overcoming it. And you will. And you will quicker. How can I be in grief and find gratitude? How can I be in misery and find joy? How can I call it a blessing when it feels like a curse? We shall overcome. That's what faith is. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is overcoming fear. Faith is using fear to springboard forward. I think of the Old Testament versus the New Testament as I close today. The Old Testament was very defined in identifying sin. It listed the sins. If you do this, you must do this to gain forgiveness. That one's going to be worth, and so you can negotiate sin. What's this going to cost me? A cow and 2 pigs? Okay, I think I can handle that. I'll go ahead and sin. That's what the Old Testament was. The New Testament requires a much different mindset. Some think it's easier. I think it's harder. It's getting control of your thoughts, getting control of your intentions, getting in control of your motivations. The Old Testament made no room for that. It's just the action. I could think evil about Jimmy for a week. There's no identifiable sin in the Old Testament. Then when I run over his toe with my cart, now I've committed the sin. But it was a week of sinning before I got there. But there is no accountability to that week of sinning. Tension doesn't count. Now intention does. And I want to ask you something. Is that new thinking a blessing or a curse to you? Certainly it's a curse. It makes it harder. Certainly it's a blessing because it gives opportunity to save your soul. The old law gave no opportunity for salvation. The new law does. So is it a blessing or a curse? It's your choice. It's your option. How do you see it? Man is given free will. And it's defined even more so under the law of Jesus Christ. Free will to think, free will to intend, free will to follow through. And here's the irony. Free will is a curse or a blessing. I liked it better when the law was defined. I knew what to do, what I could do and what I couldn't do. I could get away with much more. I could go crazy in my mind. Now I can't do that. Blessing or a curse. It's a blessing if you see it that way. It's all perspective. It's all the way you look at things. Differences are to be embraced. Differences are to be celebrated. When we see each other as different, see it as an opportunity to learn from one another. It's so easy to sit from our windows and point to people who are different, calling them names, whether verbalized or in our minds. It's much harder to embrace those differences. Other words for difference are weird, strange, or enhancing. As I learn more about you, my life is changed completely. One of the most beautiful opportunities I had, and I'm so thankful for, was when Lonnie invited me over to Jeffersonville, Indiana, to coach with him. And it was good for me, but it was great for one of my assistant coaches. I brought with me an 18-year-old boy who was born in South Florida, but snatched from South Florida when he was less than 1 year old. It was right at 1 year old. And so he was transplanted from this city of diversity, Fort Lauderdale, and dropped into a county of exclusion. I think we've broadened our numbers. When I got here, it was 98.8%. I think the county is now just under 95% white. I took him from this place of choice and options and brought him to this place that was so defined by sameness. And then Lonnie invited me over to Jeffersonville, Indiana. If we could throw a rock from our county, you could hit it to cross a river, a big river. You'd have to have a really good arm to do this, by the way. But it's just, as the crow flies, probably 7-8 miles. To drive, it was for us 25 miles. But it's right there. And it's a world apart. It's complete difference. And my son was thrust into choice and options and seeing and enhancing and learning and growing and maturing. Learning first to tolerate and then learning the glory of acceptance. We are not called to tolerate one another. We're called to accept one another, to embrace one another, to celebrate one another. Jesus could have walked past the Samaritan woman because that's what they did in those days. He stopped and connected. I'm asking you to see everything that you define as difference, whether it's a bad situation that you've determined in your life, whether it's a challenge that doesn't take your determination, it just is, whether it's an individual who isn't like you. I want you to see them differently, understanding you have two clear options. To call that moment a blessing or a curse. And we who follow Jesus Christ understand this, that everything is a subset to our salvation. Everything in this life is a subset, underneath, less than, on the level of importance, unimportant, relative to our salvation. For we know that all works for good. Call it a blessing. Identify it as a blessing. Identify it as something to overcome. Identify difference as something to embrace, something to celebrate, and see if your joy won't flourish. And why is that important? Because men are, women are, mankind is, that we might have joy. The source of joy, Jesus Christ. May the Lord bless each one of you as you now identify differently, I hope, or at least with more understanding, the difference in your life to be either a blessing or a curse. Might you find the blessings that surround you, is my prayer in Jesus' name.